Welcome to the Nairn County Podcast, which is brought to you in association with our digital partner Ziyen Energy, the leading blockchain software and digitalisation experts leading the field in emerging technologies related to oil and gas tokenisation. For more, go to ziyen.com. The word legend is often overused in football, but this time we have someone who is fully deserving of such an accolade joining us on episode 5 of the Nairn County Podcast. It's Iain Brooks sits down with our director of football, Graham MacLeod, to tell us all about his long career with Nairn County over 2 spells. In part 1, find out who the big scary man was who originally took Iain to the club and had such a positive influence on his early career. His Highland League baptism of fire, man-marking Inverness Caledonian legend, playing at our club's record defeats when we had to name a fan on the subs bench, and playing alongside big characters who enjoyed boozy bus sips. We hope you enjoy listening to what the club legend Iain Brooks has to say in part 1 of the Nairn County Podcast.
Right, Iain Brooks, it's a pleasure to have you with us on the Nairn County Podcast today. I've been really looking forward to speaking to you.
Pleasure to be here, thank you, Graham.
So, just how things are with you just now, is it down in Grantown area that you're based just now?
Yeah, still in Grantown. Transferred up from Aberdeen back to Inverness, working work-wise about 3 or 4 years ago now. So, back in the hometown and working from Inverness. A bit strange with these COVID times now, working from home and such, but battering on the same as everybody else, you know.
So, we're here to talk about the life and times in the game, playing football with us at Nairn and all the way through your time in the game. So what was it that got you into playing football initially, and what's your first memories of playing football when you were young?
When I was young, I don't think I'd ever kicked a ball till I was like 8 or 9 years old. In and out of school teams, maybe primary 5, and it wasn't until I was walking through the town one day and one of my pals walked up to me and he was just like my dad's starting up a local football team, like a boys club. I think it was the Granton Colts, it was called back then. He said, "Do you want to play?" And I was like, "Yeah, aye." And that was it. From there, it was kind of every Friday night, I think we played against the rurals like Carbridge and Cromdale and Aviemore, the old teams. A couple of years went by and we started playing teams in the Inverness Street League, and then obviously we started playing Nairn down. I think, was there a pitch down at Trades Park or something?
That's right, yeah, there
down
was.
That way, yeah. And I remember we played them a couple of times. We were getting changed after the game, and this big scary man came up to me and asked if I wanted to come to Nairn under 18s, and it was Jim Walker.
Right.
It was quite an imposing presence on a young boy back. I think it was about 13 at the time, 12 or 13, and that was my introduction to Nairn. Yeah, I went through, and that was the start of the journey with Nairn.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what got you into playing for Nairn. You played in the youth teams with Nairn. What sort of guys was there in the squad when you first went down to training?
Under 18s, when I first went through, there was guys like Big Brian Taylor, Big Stretch, the McClatchies were there, the Baird twins were there. I think, Craig Darby was there. I think he was in the first team at the time, or certainly the season after that. Graham Payton was the captain. There was Alan Ross, Trevor Johnston, he was there, and these kind of guys. It was great. It was great fun, and they made me feel completely at home. So being the only guy coming through from Granton at the time, it was great, you know.
How did you find that, going back and forth from Granton?
I kind of found it all right. It was my dad that was driving at the time, so he struggled a little bit, especially when I went through the first team. It was twice a week training, plus on a Saturday. The older I got, you get a wee job after school and that, so I finished school at 4 o'clock. Used to work in the spar shop till about 6, and then little boy would pick me up straight through to Nairn for training. That was twice a week, same on a Saturday, you know, so it was difficult for him. I found it all right, but it didn't bother me. It was hard in the winter, you know, coming across the Davos with snow. There was a few scary moments, but no, I love my time under 18s. It was great, especially having Jim Walker there. Being a young lad, and he just made me feel right at ease from the start. Basically, I wouldn't have had the career I had at Nairn if it wasn't for Jim, I think. So he's got a massive part to play in things, especially from taking through the first team as well.
I was going to say, you start training with the first team from quite a young age. Do you remember those days, and what sort of players did you sort of stand out in the sessions?
Back then, I think Craig Darby made the kind of step up, and then there was myself and Brian Taylor went through as well, now and again to help out when they were short, but mainly, I think it was about 94, I think, and back in those days, Nairn couldn't obviously go out and spend money on players, so we were lucky enough to get bled at an early age, whether we were ready for it or not. was another story. But
Yeah.
I mean, going to training, the names that were standing out, well, Sharpie was there. In all my time at Nairn, I think he's probably, between him and Gary Farker, I think Sharpie was number 2 out of the players that I played with. Just outstanding. Who else was there? Dingers was there. Martin Bell, big personality. There was Johnny Davidson, Dane Miller, Big Alan Forbes, Andy Clark. All these guys were there. And a good lot of local guys as well. You know, your Ronnies, your Danes. Rennie Cameron was still kicking a ball then. There were some massive personalities in that dressing room.
Yeah. I suppose what's that like as a 15, 16-year-old going into a dressing room with those names you mentioned?
Yeah, well, exactly. If you ask any of the guys, well, Mo, I think Mo was there for about 100 years. You know, when I turned up the first time, when he was still there when I went back for the second time, if you ask any of those players when I came through, I wouldn't say a word to anybody. You know, it was coming out of my comfort zone in under-18s, going into that first team environment. And as I said, there was massive personalities there. So I took a back seat from the start. And I think the 3 years that I was there the first time, I don't think I said a word to anybody. You know, it was really intimidating. Don't get me wrong, they were really great guys, really encouraging to help you, but the dressing room was just a riot. You know, all these big personalities. The bus home, if we made the bus home, was something special. You know, the singing, the drinking, and Martin Bell at the back was box of white wine. It's just it was really good. So difficult for a young guy like me to not know anybody. But no, I enjoyed it.
What about the training? I mean, did you find a difference in the standards? You've gone from maybe being one of the better players in the youth team, playing alongside your mates, to going into dressing room with big personalities and good players as well. Did you think the standards was a real step up?
Oh, definitely, especially being a young guy. I mean, these guys were all, I mean, you had your Sharpies there, obviously at a different level. Martin Bell, they were obviously all playing at a higher level, or Inverness Caledonian. So they'd been about a bit. You know, Alan Forbes has been playing at a higher level, not just from like a kind of learning point of view. But it was great just to understand how you speak to people in teams, you know, be it good or bad, and how you conduct yourself around them and around certain people. But as regards to the step up, what made it a little bit easier for me was the fact that Jim came up as well as Harry's assistant. Yeah. So that made my transition a lot easier. And Jim kind of had his arm around me for the first year or so, just to kind of break me in gently. And you know, because it was Harry didn't mess about with his words, and if you weren't pulling your weight, he told you. It doesn't matter if you were 15 years old or been in the game for 20 years. You know, sometimes Harry would dress you down, and then Jim would be there to kind of pick up the pieces. So that made my life a lot easier as well.
Do you remember your debut for the first team?
I think so, yeah. I remember it. It was a midweek game, and it was Cali. Yeah, the old Cali. And it was at Telford Street. It was a midweek game. It was in the winter. I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was snowing. And I was on the bench. And I'd been in the bench a couple of times leading up to that hadn't been used. And I don't know if you remember, there's a guy that played for Cali back then called Wilson Robertson. He was one of the top players. And Dane Miller, that played for us, he was one of these guys that you gave him a job and he would do it. He'd run through brick walls for you. You know, he'd a heart the size of the dugout. And it was his job to kind of man mark Wilson. And he was doing a great job, but he came off injured at half time. I was out warming up on the pitch, and I think it was Jim came out and gave me the nod, saying you're going in. So I came in, got changed, a little bit intimidated. I think we were down 2 or 3-0 at half time by this point. Harry gave me the exact same spiel that he gave Dane before the game, which was, look, get on Wilson Robertson. Don't let him get out your sight. Don't let him go. Tackle him as much as you can. Stay with him. If you win the ball, don't try anything fancy. Just give it to Sharpie. You know, that was the kind of win the ball, give it to Sharpie. That was my job. And I remember him walking me on the pitch. What have you not to do? I've not to do anything. I'm not doing anything fancy, Harry. Right. And what have you to do if you win the ball? Give it to Sharpie. You know, he was drumming this into me. And I can't actually remember the game, but I remember coming off at half time, and obviously I must have done all right. I think we conceded another couple of goals, but that was kind of my introduction to it, and I was just glad to get under my belt and out of the way. It was good. It was good again. The guys are really supportive, because it was a big game to come into for a young guy back then, especially at half time, you know. So yeah, and that was the start of it.
That's what a real baptism of fire. I mean, Wilson Robertson, I think, is one of the most legendary, if you like, Cali players from down the years.
I think it was the season after. I think he'd one more season at Cali when they amalgamated, and then he went to Bucky after that. And I remember marking him again at Bucky, and he was just a nightmare. You couldn't get near him. You know, he reminds me of a Gary Farker. He didn't look, you know, he's just this guy coming towards the end of his career by then. And I thought, this will be easy street, but I just couldn't get near him.
During one of your first seasons, or possibly your first season, the 94-95 season, we finished bottom of the league, and we lost 14-1 away at Cove, which is still a club record defeat to this day. What do you remember about that game?
Do you know, I can't actually remember much about the game itself, but I can remember a bit about the events leading up to it. I think it started off in the bus in the morning. So we're unloading the gear off the bus at Cove. Back in those days, there was a boot hamper. The under-18s cleaned the boots, put them back in the hamper. So somebody had forgot to load the boot hamper on the bus, right? So we turned up at Cove with no boots, with no shinnies. Miraculously, for some reason, I think somebody went into town and managed to get like 12 pairs of boots or something. I got a pair. I was kind of last in the pecking order, so I got a pair that were like 2 sizes too big for me. I think we only had 11 players, so we took a fan out the stands. I think it was a Cove fan, actually. Honestly, he came and sat on the bench for us with no shinnies. I remember, I think it was, who was it back then? I think it was Dane handed me a daily record and told me to roll it up and stick it down my socks. That was my shin pads for the day, was a daily record. As I say, I don't remember much about the game, but that was just the kind of starting point of a bad day, and it just got worse from there.
The next season, we also finished bottom, but we're starting to bring in guys like David McDonald, Mo McMillan, you mentioned Sharpie, Neil Sinclair as well. So I suppose that's maybe starting to lay the foundations for what was to come 6 or 7 years down the line.
Definitely. Well, the 3 names you mentioned there, Nugget and Mo, they were a bit of a double act. And when I left the first time, when I came back, they were still there. They were the kind of people you went to. When I came back the second time, the likes of your Johnny Davidsons and your Alan Forbes, your strong personalities, they'd left, and kind of Mo and Nugget had kind of slid into that role. But bringing in Sinky, what a player he was when he was, I think he was only a year or 2 older than me at the time. But as a striker, he could do, he was holding the ball up. And I remember we're playing teams like Cove and Lossiemouth, who were quite strong back then, Huntley, and he didn't look out of place. He could have strolled into any one of their teams. He really was a really good player, and he was adaptable. He could play anywhere. It was great having Sinky and that kind of guys there. And as you say, that was the type of player that they were looking forward to bringing in the future, and to start to do that.
And before the 96-97 season was out, Harry left the club as the manager. You mentioned a bit about Harry there. What was it like working under him, the manager that gave you your debut, and then how was things around the club and the mood in the camp and the squad when he was sacked from the job?
I mean, when I first went to Nairn, you walk up the corridor at Station Park, and there's all these pictures of guys, from especially the 70s, the title winning side, and obviously Harry stood out. He was kind of a club legend at the time. You had guys, because I was still a kid, couldn't drive. I had guys coming through to Grant and picking up like Stan Brown, another clip. All these guys with photos were on the wall. Harry was great. His training was good. He didn't have a big budget to spend, so he relied a lot on kind of guys digging hard, and there was no kind of flair players back then. So he did the best he could with what he had. I didn't really get to know him that well, but when I left, or just as he got sacked and Jim took over, I think the foundations had already been laid for me to move on by that point. As I mentioned earlier on, I was a really quiet kid. Although I loved playing football at that time and being in the dressing room with these guys, I couldn't become part of the banter, if you like, because I was just so shy. Looking at Strathspey at the time, all my pals were playing at Strathspey. It was round the corner from my house. You had guys there like Big Gareth Smith, my best mate. He was there. And just when Jim took over, I think that was one of the hardest kind of phone calls I'd ever had to make in my life, was phoning Jim to say, look, I think it'll be better for me if I go to Strathspey at that time.
Yeah, I suppose did it make it that bit more difficult that it was Jim that got the job because he'd had such an influence on your early career?
That's exactly what I was going to say, because it was Jim that took me through. He supported me through all those kind of years, and then as soon as he takes over, for me to phone him and say, look, basically, thanks for what you've done, but I'm off. I'm leaving. It was really difficult, but fair play to Jim. Took it really well, and he basically left the door open for me. He understood why I was going. And said, look, if it doesn't work out at Strathspey, we'll take you back in a heartbeat. And I could have asked more of him. So I don't think I really played under Jim when he took over, which has kind of always bugged at me a little bit, because I would have loved to have stayed. But it just wasn't for me at the time. So
you spent a couple of seasons with Strathspey. Is that where you really start to find your feet, if you like, in adult football?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the old saying, sometimes you've got to take a step back to take 2 steps forward kind of thing. And it really was the making of me. I was more comfortable there. It was guys I'd known my whole life, my friends. And don't get me wrong, some of the players that were there at the time were outstanding. Like Colin McLean, for example, Inverness Thistle legend. You had all ex-Highland League players like Gavin Green, Eddie Morrison, Lee O'Brien, I think he was at Nairn before me. And the manager at the time was Donley McLeod, another ex-Nairn player, who the Highland Leagues came to know well over the past few years. So it was really good. And because I knew them, I found it easier to I found my voice, if you like. I kind of grew up a little bit, and it stood me in really good stead for the future. And I think that's where I learned to enjoy a bus journey home to its full extent, to the point of even taking guitars on the bus, just purely for the sing-song on the way home. But no, those were good years. I really enjoyed my football there, and it was a great bunch of guys.
The Nairn County Podcast is brought to you in association with our digital partners, Ziyen Energy. Click on Ziyen.com to find out more.